Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? I am excited to be with you as I get ready to share my screen with you. All right. My name is Nicolette Gordon, and I am a licensed professional counselor, associate counselor. And I'm here today to present to you a workshop on positive parenting techniques for positive behavior in children. Once this is done, this will be available for you to view at your leisure, and I hope that you will find the information informative and you will find some practical things that you can use in addition to the parenting things that you are already doing with your children. So let's get right into it. I have my notes here, so I will be moving through each slide and checking my notes. All right, so today we're looking at recognizing positive behaviors in children, because we know that sometimes the positive behaviors can be overshadowed by those negative behaviors that we see in our children, or those times when they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So we tend to kind of highlight those negative behaviors or those poor performances. So we're going to look at ways that we can begin to recognize more often those positive behaviors in children. We're also going to talk a little bit about recognizing, what is appropriate behavior? And appropriate behavior can be based on many things, and we're going to look at that today. Because as we foster those positive behaviors, as we foster communication in our children, we're in essence feeding into them being functioning adults in our society today. And we want to build encouragement, we want to build optimism for them. So let's get right into the presentation today. And I must say that before we get into the actual portion about the positive behaviors, we're going to talk a little bit about communication. Communication. What is the main context of communication in your household? Okay, think about that for a minute. So basically, is communication usually about the things that have to be done in the house, chores, homework, getting things done? Is that the main context of communication in your home, right? Think about it, criticism, the things that have to be done each and every day. What is the main way or the main topic, let's say that you communicate to your children? The next thing is, how do you communicate, right? So what we're talking about here is, do you yell? Do you scream? Do you actually sit at the table and have conversation with your children, allowing them to ask questions, allowing to communicate perspective and the reasons why you tell them to do a certain thing and how to do it? Or is it really just a yelling match? Is it really just do as I say? Right? So think about it. Think about not only the context, those common things that you communicate and the way that you communicate to children in your household each and every day. Also, how do you communicate? Are you accustomed to yelling? Right? When kids are growing up, we often tell them to use their inside and outside voice. But as adults, as parents, are we practicing the use of our inside and our outside voices? Are we encouraging the practice of healthy communication, healthy communicating feelings and expressions and curiosities? Next is, can you clearly identify your communication style and tone? So a lot of what this communication slide is about also has to do with your parenting style. So let's quickly look at several types of parenting styles. We have authoritative, I could never say those words, but give me a second. Authoritative, thank you, which is being firm but yet supportive. Then you have authoritarian, which is the strict disciplinarian kind of perspective of parenting. You also have the permissive, okay? So the permissive is indulgent and warm, nurturing, but tend to be relaxed and sometimes inconsistent when it comes to the parenting roles and guidelines and rules and regulations. And then you have the uninvolved parent. The uninvolved parent really doesn't meet basic physical, emotional needs. If you look at like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that parent, that uninvolved parent, does not meet any of those fundamental needs. So based on what we've shared so far, can you identify your communication style? Can you start to just think, how do I communicate to my child? Am I yelling? You know, when I start talking, do they get nervous? All right, let's just start thinking about that and make a note in your mind about the way that you communicate as you parent. Next, we're going to briefly look at language nutrition. I was in a workshop that started, that was talking about the importance of language building. So I just want to go over a few points that I received from this workshop as it relates to language nutrition, because again, it relates to how we communicate. And the first bullet says, abundant, positive, and language-rich social interactions that ensure the brain's architecture is functioning, the neural connections needed for social and emotional development, self-regulation, and executive functioning. Basically, the more we talk, the more our children begin to build language. The more they build language, the more they're able to communicate their needs, their wants, and their desires. And then once that begins, we have to start nurturing that and feeding that. Expressive language, right? This is the use of words, sentences, gestures, and writing to convey meaning and messages to others. Okay, so we need words. We need to develop our words. We need to develop structure in sentences in order for our children to be able to communicate their needs, wants, and desires. To be able to express when something is not going right with them and they need to communicate to you. Then you have receptive language. This is the ability to understand the meaning of what's being communicated. And what's involved in that is verbal, written, and sign language. However we communicate, right? Being able to understand what is being conveyed to us. And it's the same thing with our children. And then pragmatic language. This deals with the social communication skills that we all need, because we know that when children start, you know, pre-K or kindergarten, they are beginning the socialization process. They are learning how to interact with others. They are learning how to share. They are learning how to express. They're learning how to apologize and, you know, to be friendly. So this is also an important part of language, leading to an important part of our communication. So as you can see, I am first addressing some fundamental things that we need to consider in parenting. We're looking at communication, and now we're going to take a look at effective listening. Yes, yes, yes. We all say we listen, but guess what? Sometimes we're not listening in the way and the capacity that we ought to listen. So we're going to take a few moments to go over these 5 types of listening. And I'm sure you can probably guess what some of these are referring to, but let's take a moment to go over each one of them. First, we have comprehensive listening. Now that is when you make judgments based on what the other person says and determine the truthfulness of the statements you hear, right? So oftentimes, sometimes think back, you're in a conversation, somebody is talking, you're listening and you're starting to think, how true is this, right? So you're listening with a comprehensive hearing as you critically listen or evaluatively listen, excuse me. So this is one way of listening for the entire picture, listening to see if everything is truthful. Next, we have discriminative listening. This involves identifying the difference between tones and sounds to figure out how these differences may affect the entire meaning of the sentence. Come on, I'm sure you can think of an example of this. You know, you're talking to somebody, but their face is like saying something else, you know, in terms of how they're listening, you know. So that may make you pause for a little bit like, okay, wait a minute. I'm picking up on some cues here. Discriminative listening. So listening for tones and sounds. Somebody may say, I'm doing okay. But the way in which they say they're doing okay does not correlate or does not mesh up to the fact that they say they're okay, right? So we have to pay attention to all the cues when we're listening. Next, we have critical listening. Now, critical listening requires you to listen to a message and assess whether the message and the speaker are both trustworthy. You compare it to the knowledge you may already have on the subject and form your own analysis and opinion on the message, okay? So again, here we're talking about you probably have to make some decisions. So you have to listen with a critical ear in order to make an evaluative decision about what it is that you're hearing. You may be trying to make a decision between two different products or, you know, on the job, and you have to listen with a critical ear in order to move forward. Next, we have full listening, and you can probably guess what this is. This is listening with an aim to fully understand what the content of the conversation is. In this type of listening, you may pause to summarize to the person that's speaking to make sure that you understand what is being said. So you may summarize or you may paraphrase back to the person speaking to ensure that you're listening and understanding what is being communicated to you. So sometimes, you know, this type of listening is effective if you're sitting in a webinar, a workshop, you're listening to a presentation or a lecture where you have to fully be engaged in order to be able to not only understand, but to maybe ask questions, to be able to report what's going on or report to someone else what you've heard in a particular session. And lastly, we have deep listening. Deep listening requires you and the other speaker to understand each other's side. You must carefully pay attention to the details of a conversation and pick up on many cues. These cues can include body languages, identifying biases and preferences, figuring out goals and needs, and perceiving values and beliefs. So this is being totally present in a conversation. And sometimes we are not always present in conversations. Think about when your child may be trying to talk to you about their day. And instead of turning our attention fully to the child and listening with everything, you know, we may be trying to, you know, wash the dishes or, you know, prepare, something was on my lip, prepare a meal or, you know, do something else. You know, you're still working, you brought some work from home. So you're not fully engaged with the child that's trying to tell you about their day. Deep listening involves you putting in all your senses into the person that's speaking, to listen for cues and to recognize that my child may be saying they had a good day, but you know, when you look at their face as they're telling this story, it's communicating something different. So this is an opportunity to dig deeper and to find out what is really going on as your child is telling this story about their day. So again, we have comprehensive, discriminative, critical, full, and deep. So right now, I want you to take a moment and think about the ways in which you may do these different types of listening, right? Do you do a particular one more maybe at work, or another one maybe more at home. All right, so start thinking about this as we move into talking a little bit about discipline. So 2 things you're thinking about. You're thinking about communication, the way you communicate. Well, actually 3. You're thinking about the way you communicate. You're thinking a little bit about your parenting style, and you're also thinking about the way in which you listen. So a little bit more on listening before we get into our discipline, positive discipline. We're looking at partial, selective, and false. And again, some of these words probably came to your mind when we were talking about the last slide. But let's just talk about each one of them a little bit more, adding to what we've already discussed about listening. Partial listening. Tell the truth, we've all done this at some point. Guess what? You may be doing it right now. Trying to listen to this webinar while you're cutting up the bell peppers for that dinner. All right, let's get into the definition. Partial listening is when you have the intention to listen to another person, but you are what? Distracted. And so often we are distracted because it is so much going on, so many things that we have to take care of, and we are distracted. So we are listening, but we're missing those cues that we just talked about in the last slide. You know, we're missing the body language. We're missing the tone, all those things. You know, it may be that sometimes our mind just kind of strays to something else, right? So we're not fully responding in the way that we ought to because we miss some critical detail of what is being conveyed to us. And let's just all say, raise your hand. We've all done partial listening at some point in our lives, right? But the idea is to practice. And we're talking about parenting. So the whole idea is to practice being fully present, right? Not doing that partial listening when our child is trying to communicate to us, but be very intentional. Next, we have selective. And yes, this is another one. We've used the word selective listening. You know, they just want to hear what they want to hear, right? So this type of listening is when you only address certain aspects of what the other person has said in order to filter the message to more quickly understand its intent. But sometimes, our selective listening is just hearing the parts that we want to hear, hearing what soothes us, hearing what makes us comfortable, right? Because we don't want to hear the hard stuff because, maybe we got to deal with some hard issues, right? Selective listening can lead to what? Miscommunication, right? And we don't want that to happen. And, we've all done this at some point. We've heard and we just misunderstood. But the important thing is to be mindful of when we're partially listening, be mindful of when we're selectively listening. And last is false listening. So you can almost imagine what that one is all about. False listening is when you pretend you're listening to the other person, but are not really comprehending a thing. Okay, so this is the example I'm going to use. How many of you have ever been on the phone and you're talking and the other person responds to you, and the way in which they respond, you're like, that has nothing to do with what I just said, right? They're not really listening, right? So false listening. These type of listeners, they may show in some way, shape, or form that they are listening. They're nodding their head. Mm-hmm. They're giving you the sound, mm-hmm, right? But guess what? Nothing is really registering such that they can then follow up with a solid response to what is being said. So again, have to be mindful of the ways in which we're listening. And sharing this, it's all about recognizing when we are actually doing one of these, right? I used to have this joke between my sister and I. My sister and I, you know, she says she's a multitasker. So she can listen while she's cooking. And there were times when I wanted her full attention, like all of her attention. I wanted her to sit and look in my eyes. I wanted to see when, you know, my voice cracked, you know, in what I was communicating to her. But it got to a place where she would say, do I need to sit down? And I would say, yes, right? Because then I know in that moment what I was communicating or what I wanted to communicate, I needed her to be fully present. I didn't want partial listening, selective listening, false listening. I wanted deep listening such that I can get the feedback that I needed in that moment related to the topic that was presented. All right, so if you were present right about now, I would do a little quiz to give away some prizes, but guess what? That's for the next parenting session. All right, let's keep it moving. All right, now we're gonna look at what is appropriate behavior. And we know that appropriate behavior is based on several things. And in this slide, I've only placed a few of those things, right? Appropriate behavior could be based on culture. It could be placed related to your values, you know, your religion or spirituality. And it could also be related to your life experiences. And within that, we have to look at, again, the way in which we encourage positive behavior could be associated with all four of these things. And there are many more, a list of other things that could be associated to what we look at as appropriate behavior. Okay, so as you sit, as you watch, think about these 4 bullet points and other factors that may be related to how you parent and what you see and find as appropriate behaviors. One of the things I do like you to consider here is appropriate behavior based on developmental stages. Because sometimes we are expecting either more or less of a child based on their age. You know, we may be expecting a 4-year-old to be able to do certain things that they are not able to do as yet, right? We may be requiring a toddler to do something that they're not ready to be or, you know, developmentally able to do at a certain point. So we have to be watchful and mindful of the things that we are expecting our children to be able to do when they're not at that developmental stage as yet. All right, I want to read this quote by Bill Ayers. Your kids require you most of all to love them for who they are, not to spend your whole time trying to correct them. All right, we need correction, but not to spend the whole time correcting. And I would like you to keep this quote in mind as we move through the presentation. There's going to be a certain point when you're going to connect this quote to some more information that I have coming. Now we're getting into positive reinforcement. So what is positive reinforcement? Positive reinforcement is a form of positive discipline, right? And you notice that the word that's being used is discipline. It's not punishment, it's discipline, right? So positive reinforcement is a form of positive discipline. Positive reinforcement taps into your children's individual strengths. It draws attention to their personality traits and interests, and as a result, give us an opportunity to connect, communicate effectively, and ultimately empower them to do more, to be more, of themselves. Again, we're encouraging children in terms of their natural given talents and abilities, those things that, you know, as parents, we start to notice in them. We're trying to cultivate that and we're trying to nourish that. Positive reinforcement is intended to encourage a desired behavior, okay, by introducing rewards shortly after the occurrence and therefore increase the likelihood of repetition. So basically, you see something, oh, that's a good behavior. Respond to it in that moment in order to encourage repetition of that positive good behavior that you observed, okay? It can be used to encourage behaviors you want to increase, right? So again, when you notice the positive behavior, recognize the positive behavior, present some type of reward system so that the child recognizes that the behavior, okay, is being noticed. Positive reinforcement can be effective and of long-lasting value. It may require a change of habit, guess on who? The part of the parent, all right? As much as it is intended to change the behavior of the child. How many of y'all remember, I know for me, let me say this, like, growing up and my mom would, try to put me on punishment, like I couldn't watch television. Back then it was only one television in the house, right? I couldn't go to another room and sneak and watch something, right? It's only one television in the house. But she tells me I can't watch television, but I'm sitting in the living room with her. So she wants to watch television, and she don't kind of realize, guess what? I'm watching television too, right? So the punishment at the time couldn't be enforced, taking away television from me couldn't be enforced because it was only one television in the house, right? So sometimes when we are trying to change behaviors or change practices or change the way we do something, it also, with our children, let me say that it also impacts us and requires us as parents to also do things to change. The most important aspect of effective praise is to compliment the behavior, okay? Not the person, right? Compliment the behavior, not the person, right? You don't want the child to start thinking about the idea of the fact that their personality needs to be changed, but rather that the behavior needs to be changed, right? It's important also to, as I said, recognize a change of habits for the parents, to praise versus criticize, okay? Sometimes we wait for a place where something goes wrong, we're criticizing instead of making use of those opportunities when we can praise a behavior or praise a child for something, right? And the last one is to take interest in the child's curiosities, right? These are opportunities for them to master something, to get more training in something. We may notice a child, curious about animals and pets and, maybe, expose them to, pet shop. If they're old enough, if they can volunteer in a pet shop, allow them to do that. It's an interest, they're curious about something. Use those opportunities to feed into their curiosities. I almost felt like saying, do you have any questions? But, this is not a live webinar, so I can't ask if there's any questions. But if you have any questions, you can feel free to, communicate to, one of our sync teachers and, or contact me, and I'll be glad to answer some of your questions. Examples of positive reinforcement used in schools. And I'm just gonna go over these real quickly because I just wanted to give you an idea of some ways positive reinforcement can be seen. It can be seen in compliments and recognition, public praise, positive notes to parents and teachers, a pat on the back, a smile, a homework-free night, choices of activity, time or lunch with somebody special, increased recess time. So, some of these can actually translate to the home, that you can actually utilize some of these ideas that are used in schools. But I wanted to just give you an idea, a quick look at some ways positive reinforcement can be used. I would like to highlight here is that when it comes to recognizing and praising more so than criticizing, it's important that you do more positive comments than negative responsives. Okay, so let me give you an example. You can either tell a child, I really like the way you're keeping all the blocks on the table, or you can wait, right, until all the blocks crash, and then you send a message of be careful. Okay, so it's a matter of positive comments when you see it. Don't wait until all the blocks fall off before you make a comment, but to encourage that good behavior or the good practice or the good work that you notice in your child, and not when they're messed up. So another example of this is when your child is doing well in school, right? To praise that behavior, right? If your child is not doing so well, but they're trying and you see them trying, let them know, when they, maybe pass a test, even though their grades are not fully coming up, but they passed the test, right? To recognize the steps, recognize that they are trying, they just passed the test, it's pulling their grade up, but it's not quite there yet, instead of focusing on the fact that they have a low grade in school, overall grade, and make that the central focus versus the fact that they are working diligently and, completing their homework assignments, passing their test and really trying to work up, pulling up their grade. So one author says that there should be 5 positive comments to every negative response. That's a mindset shift, right? 5 positive comments to every negative response. That's a total shift, right? Because we're not going to wait until they didn't do their chores for us to say something, or the fact that they didn't, complete the dishes properly, but recognizing first, maybe they started doing the dishes without being told. You recognize that. Thank you for doing the dishes without being told. I like how you take charge of the chores that you have, right? I like how you come home and you sit to do your homework before anyone says, do your homework, right? So those are a few examples. And I hope that as we've reviewed this quick list and I've shared those 2 quick examples, that you're starting to think about ways that you can give 5 positive comments to 1 negative response. Any questions? All right, moving right along. Rewards. 4 types of rewards that we're going to look at today. We have natural reinforcers, social reinforcers, token reinforcers, and tangible rewards. Natural reinforcers, let's start at the top. Our examples of that is kind of like the example that I just shared a few minutes ago. It's in the form of good grades or a sense of self-satisfaction for a job well done, right? So the fact that a child gets a good grade, right, it's a natural reinforcer because they studied, they put the work in, they did the homework, they take a test. They are elated that, guess what, I passed this test. The work that I put in paid off. Then you have social reinforcers, like recognition or approval of others that can be expressed through compliments, encouragement, and specific praise, these can also be powerful ways of communicating and encouraging a type of reward system. Then we have token reinforcers that are offered in place of tangible rewards, can also be effective in encouraging progress towards goals. So in this example, a child may earn points or accumulate tokens, which then can be traded in for something of value. And this reward system, probably many of you are connected to as it relates to tokens. Some of you may have a chart system where, you know, if the child completes their chores or gets their homework done or whatever it is that they build up, they may get a star. You know, it's kind of like in school, you know, kindergartners, you know, they get stars for the whole week, and then they may build up to ice cream Fridays, right? And the same thing may be done at home, you know, pizza night or something like that. So that's the token reinforcer type of reward. And then finally, you have your tangible rewards, which can be used to kickstart motivation, but satisfaction in a job well done should be stressed. We want to use rewards to restore motivation, not to make them the object of the pursuit. So sometimes, you know, this idea of rewards, children can shift into depending on the reward. So they want the reward, so they do what it is that needs to be done. And what we do, we don't want that to become the practice or the behavior or the focus, but to make sure that our children are motivated, right, towards the reward, and not just, you know, looking forward to that so they do what they think they're supposed to do, right? So again, I mentioned a method of reward system, and those can be charts. You know, they use them in school. Think about when your child was in kindergarten, the chart that the teacher used to let the children know when they were doing, you know, cleaning up time well, or, you know, sharing with a friend, all those things. I keep wanting to say, do you have any questions? All right. Yeah, I'm not going to promise I'm not going to say it again, but all right. So we're almost wrapping up. One of the things that I would like to go over briefly before I wrap up is emotional intelligence, right? Emotion coaching for kids suggests that we describe behavior in terms of what we see and only then say how we feel about it, right? Because again, we don't want to make the child think it's something just wrong with them, right? Model behaviors we want them to imitate and do not contradict it, i.e. by yelling. You know, our children watch us, you know, whether or not they are, what can I say, they're clearly watching, you know, they sense, they feel, you know, they hear. So we have to be mindful about the behaviors that we're modeling. We also want to apologize. You know, again, ultimately, we are training children up to be productive citizens of society, and, you know, learning how to apologize. You know, it also teaches a child how to apologize. You know, sometimes when we're wrong, because we're the adult, we don't want to say we're wrong. We don't want to apologize, and apologizing and explaining to the child, you know, I want to apologize. I thought you didn't do your homework, but you did. Thank you for doing your homework. You know, again, it goes back to those points that we talked about earlier, the idea of communicating and listening, right? Because even in that, we're modeling the behaviors that we want our child to practice. Respect their needs, right? And again, you know, and I'm saying this, you know, repeatedly, it goes back to communication and listening, to be able to pick up on those key tones and, you know, body language, to know exactly the core of what they need, and what, you know, they may say one thing, but what do they really need? validate their experiences, help them solve problems. Life is about solving problems. Every day it's a new one, right? But we didn't have the book that said, let me teach you how to solve problems, right? Growing up. But life is all about solving problems. What better way than to help our children start at a young age to learn how to solve problems? And to think before you say no. Sometimes we, just instinctively respond in such a way because we may not have the time, we're tired, so many things is going on as adults that, you may have to deal with, process, work through, have to work through your own problems, etc. But again, going back to listening and communicating, taking that pause moment to know exactly what is going on with our children so that we can respond in the most effective way possible. And that brings me to the end of my presentation today on positive discipline. All right, so today we talked about positive reinforcement. We talked about communication, language and listening. We talked about building language in our children. So that means that, guess what? We have to talk to them. We have to use words. We're not just going to allow them to sit, by themselves. We want to keep putting words before them. The idea that to use 5 positive comments to 1 negative response, and to exercise emotional intelligence. The benefits of positive reinforcement are in step with what positive psychology teaches us about cultivating a positive mindset and focusing on what is good in people. We need to focus on what is good in our children and nurture that. All right, so this is the end of my presentation. I just want to bring you to the last slide. See, there it is, questions and answers, but no Q&A time. But next time when I see you live, we'll be able to have some Q&A. We'll be able to give away some prizes. I still got prizes, so don't miss the next parenting training coming up in December, I believe. Yes. So I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this parenting workshop presentation, and I look forward to seeing you at our next workshop. Thanks and have a wonderful evening.